Titles appear on a black screen. San Francisco Aerial Arts Festival and Zacco Dance Theater presents Record 2020. A film by Joanna Hygood and Mary Ellen Strom. In collaboration with artists Veronica Blair, Lindsay Butcher, Beth Clark, Terry Crane, Joanna Diaz, Pamela Donahue, Dion Fox, Joe Kreider, Jody Lomask, Wanda Moretti, Lane Retmer, Amelia Rudolph, Alice Shepard, Soshito Sosa, Jason Spann, Julia Taffe. Music by Walter Kitundu, Marco Castelli, Melanie Demore, Lane Retmer, Marcus Shelby, Lauren Weinger. Black screen. Jason Spann. Honeysuckle Lane, Jacksonville, Florida, USA. The camera pans across framed pictures of African American men in military uniforms and pans up and across the inside of a family living room, and out to a backyard past a barbecue, a green lawn, a brown wooden fence with moss hanging from the trees, a white steel hoop wrapped in white tape. Brown hands reach up and grab it. Now brown feet flex, holding by the ankles a young African-American man, and hangs by one ankle as the hoop spins in a circle, suspended above by four struts, a portable structure to hang aerial equipment. In the backyard of a normal family house, a basketball hoop in the background. Jason holds the hoop by one hand and spins, extending his athletic legs out behind and around. He pulls himself up off the ground, extends out, holding the hoop in one hand and spinning effortlessly. He swings his legs up into the hoop and sits, extending one leg long, sitting the other leg bent below. He holds his two hands at the top of the hoop and spins, bringing his legs together, making him spin ever faster and faster until he's spinning so fast, and then extends one leg slowly out, slowing the spin, grabs his ankle and extends his leg out into a split. He extends his arm and hangs by one arm behind him. Now he switches to the opposite elbow to hang, and now reaches his leg behind his head and pulls it up, contorting himself while hanging by one arm. He extends the other leg out into a split. The camera pans across the wooden fence at the back of the yard and back onto Jason, who is balancing only on his shoulder blades, arching his back, hands free, legs hanging, as he looks up at the sky, arching his back and balancing on the hoop as it spins, continues to spin. He extends his arms above his head, continuing to spin. Now he's up in the hoop again and swings his leg up, wrapping it around the rope that suspends the hoop, pulling his leg through and down and pressing against the bottom of the hoop, holding it by the side and making a split again. The camera again pans past the basketball hoop, the green lawn, the moss-covered trees, the wooden fence, the black barbecue, and out back again to the front of the house, opening the front door, emerging into the front yard, opening into an idyllic suburban Florida landscape with cars along the street. A close-up of Jason's face in a mask. He looks down the street and begins to run down the street, jogging down the sidewalk into the distance. He passes a young person riding a bicycle past him down the street as he runs into the distance and blackout. Lindsay Butcher. Rowan Rock, Glenesk, Scotland. A silver sky, clouds in fast motion receding over the horizon. The sky brightens, revealing a green hills and trees. The sky becomes more bright and blue, the clouds receding more rapidly. A woman at the end of a long rope leans out against the rope. She's close-cropped gray and white hair and a rust-colored long-sleeved shirt. She's attached to the end of a rope and leans against a giant granite boulder with a tree growing majestically out of it. She rolls along the rope, her weight suspended by the rope on the edge of the rock. She presses her feet against the rock and leans back, looking up at the sky and with outstretched arms. She crouches at the side of the rock, leans up and back. She reaches down, leaning to one side, and again stands, turns, leans out against the rope on the edge of the rock. She reclines along the edge of the rock, her head down toward the green grass below. She reaches one leg out to the side, makes her body almost horizontal. Now she stands at a 45-degree angle, begins to walk up, leaning back against the rope, leaning out into the sky, extending an arm above her head, legs crossed. She arches back, leans up, shifts her weight from side to side, and begins to walk almost horizontally around the rock. Slowly shifts her weight, bends her knees, reaches one leg out behind her, balancing at an impossible angle. One foot on the rock, she bends her knees and surrenders to gravity, head down toward the ground, and fade to black. Terry Crane. Reinig Bridge, Snoqualmie, Washington, USA. A close-up on the water of a river, twigs floating in it, slowly pans up to a reflection of a bridge above the water. Green trees surrounding it. And now, from another angle, the camera zooms in on the bridge through the leaves and branches of the trees along the side. And now a close-up of the bridge, rusted I-beams held together by rivets, a little bit of graffiti on one corner. And now the camera is on the bridge, panning along, tracking along, mountains and trees in the background. A man, bare-chested in white pants with a beard, climbs upside down up a white circus rope that's suspended from above in the latticework. He swings his legs down and around and through and wraps the rope around his pelvis, tucking his arm underneath. He swings back up, upside down, and wraps the rope around his waist. He flips the tail of the rope over his head and then hangs, unwraps his leg, and spins down to the ground, toward the ground, then swings, brings his knee up to hook the rope, and then climbs one leg at a time, swinging and hooking and swinging and hooking until he's reached almost the top where the rope is fixed. He squeezes the rope between his feet, extends his legs out, holding one arm up so that he's standing sideways against the rope, drops, catches the rope between his legs, and then holding it behind his back, opens his legs out, balancing and dropping to the ground. The camera tracks to the edge of the bridge, to a close-up on a green leaf, a twig with green leaves above the water. Blackout. Veronica Blair. Beach Chalet Fields, San Francisco, California, USA. Hands reach through a chain link fence, fingers pressing through the sharp wire. A medium-skinned African-American woman with a long braid climbs to the top of the fence and sits, straddling the bar at the top. She reaches up into the sky. She bends, arches back, her braid hanging behind her. She sits vertically now and reaches out with her hands to press up onto the top of the bar, placing the front of her pelvis on the bar and balancing with her arms out to the front, her legs out to the back. She collapses over the bar, down, grabs the wire of the fence, her braid dangling again. She whips it up over the top of her head. She rolls along the top of the bar, extending one leg up, letting her head hang back. She presses up, swings one leg up over the top of the bar now. Her knee bent. She reaches out with one hand and then the other, walks her hands out as though she was trying to relax, soften onto the top of this very rough-looking fence. She drags her hand down one side, looks at the details of the wire fence, feeling the fence with her fingers. She looks at it again, presses up, looks up again at the sky, the trees in the background behind her. She reaches her other leg over to bring it to the front and now sits with her knees on one side of the fence, facing us. She reaches her arms out, looking up at the sky, balances with her hands off the fence, her feet out, balancing in front. She reaches her head around, whips around, and begins to climb down the fence, fingers through the wire, toes through the wire. She climbs down, climbs out of the frame from another angle, the other side. The camera catches her. She comes down to the ground on a green athletic field. She pounds against the fence, pounds, almost smashing her head figuratively against the fence, her long braid whipping into the wire of the fence. She grabs sticks with her fingers through the fence again and climbs up. And now she hangs as though from the top bar. Her hands aren't visible. Now she hangs from one arm outside of the frame, as though running in slow motion, her knees bent front and behind her. Now she spins, leaping off the fence, turning a kind of barrel turn around, hanging from one arm. She walks up and hangs upside down, her focus back toward us, her braid hanging down. She walks up again and around and looks at us, spins down to hang from her one arm, and now hangs vertically just from the one arm. She reaches back up, places her toes through the wire gaps in the fence, and climbs up and out of the frame as it fades to black. Julia Taff. Florencia Beach, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. A woman sits at a beach atop a giant piece of driftwood, a tree buried in the sand, its roots uprooted 20 feet into the air. She sits, her arms outstretched, looking out over the waves crashing at the beach. She embraces herself. The wind blows in her hair.
Gently I go, softly I know, nothing to fear.
She extends one leg out toward the waves, begins to descend.
I'll fly far from this place on the wings of grace.
The camera angle changes and looks up from below through the gnarled roots. Her arm extends out and her head, almost mimicking the twisted shapes of the roots, and then retreating back in. The bleached roots, white and barren. The camera angle changes again as she stands atop, feeling delicately with her feet to balance on one of the roots, almost like a tightrope walker standing atop the bleached white roots, her arms out to the sides, maintaining her balance and extending in the wind. She grips two of the roots to steady her balance and shifts her weight so that one of her legs is standing on a much more delicate branch root that quivers as she shifts her weight back and forth. She flicks her foot behind and then feels the delicate branch with the sole of her foot. She brushing her toes along the texture of the wood. The camera, back to a long shot, looks out. The waves in the background. Julia at the top, looking down, her hair blowing in the wind, extending her arms out, almost as though waving to someone out far across the ocean. She reaches one leg out in an arabesque, steps down onto the trunk of the giant tree. She hangs back, looking up at the sky, and fades to black. I think about my home, how this land is sacred. I think about the Nuchanu, how well they have cared and care for this place, shared it and share it with each other, with other species, with dangerous aliens, with settlers like me, understanding everything is one. Lane Retmer and Mary Ellen Strom. The Creek Between Us. Bozeman Creek, Bozeman, Montana, USA. Voice of Lizanne Kudrina.
And as I sit here, I realize that there's a lot going on inside of this quiet space. There's a lot of sound. And I kind of want to stop and listen.
A woman in a wheelchair sits in a creek.
And notice the sounds that the creek makes and rolling over the rocks, and notice the sound that the leaves are making as the wind.
Another woman sits in a tree on a branch.
And
another woman sits in a wheelchair on a platform on the side of the creek.
And I see the leaves moving and the branches, and I become more aware of.
She gestures.
The birds and all the different voices while I'm just hanging out here at the creek, and I'm looking up into the sky and seeing those leaves and branches and just wanting to be pulled up into them and have that
She opens her arms.
360-degree view, but also be able to look down and see myself and realize that I have a different reality up there than I do down here on Earth, and really wanting to be in that more ethereal reality instead of stuckness that I can feel down on the ground sometimes.
The dancer in the creek and the dancer in the tree are both wearing masks.
And as I'm up there, I'm aware that the river, the creek, is feeding my roots as a human, but also
The dancer in the tree steps up and stands on the large branch crossing the tree. The dancer in the wheelchair stays in the water, gesturing up to the sky. Both of them clap on their thighs. They begin to gesture in unison, arms above their heads, out to the sides, out to the side again, and cradling as though cradling a baby.
Shaboom splish splash, ripple rip rap. Shaboom splish splash, ripple rip rap. Shaboom splish splash, ripple rip rap. Shaboom splish splash.
The dancer on the platform begins to gesture as well. Places her hand on her hands, opens her arms to the sky. She swings her arms forward and back. She places her elbow over her eyes. The dancer in the tree gestures toward the sky with one arm and then the other. She folds her arms in front of her belly. The dancer in the creek and the dancer in the tree
aware that the
swing their arms in unison.
is feeding my roots as a human, but also the roots of the trees. And I feel a little connection between the trees and myself because of
The dancer in the creek splashes her hands into the creek.
really wonderful.
And the water covers the camera and blackout. Sochi Sosa. Tillery Street Bridge, East Austin, Texas, USA. Bare feet walk in the mud toward a bright red trunk. A woman with dark hair and dark eyes bends down, opens the trunk, and pulls out a black piece of heavy webbing. She reaches the loop of webbing up and clips a carabiner into a rope hanging from the bottom of a large concrete structure like a freeway or a bridge. She presses against the concrete buttress on one side of her and swings out toward another concrete buttress that's covered with ivy, green. Beneath her is a muddy puddle. She steps into the puddle and begins to run gently in a circle, the rope holding her weight so that she floats effortlessly, running in slow motion. Now she reaches her hand down toward the ground, touches and spins gracefully around her hand, dragging through the muddy water, her red dress hanging towards the water, and the rope pulls her up, her red dress hanging. In the background is a almost jungle-like green vegetation contrasting her red dress. Now the camera shoots from below. Looking up, she spins, her red dress swinging in the air behind her, the gray concrete of the underside of the bridge, her background, a little wisp of vegetation along one part of the bridge. She articulates her legs, pulls one leg up into a split. She swings, she extends her arms out to the sides, her legs crossed. She pulls her arms and legs in, gently spinning. Now she extends, the camera comes back out to shoot from the side. She spins, spiraling her arms in a graceful spiral as she spins. Again, her red dress in contrast to the lush green vegetation in the background. The rope begins to lower her towards the ground. She reaches her hand down toward the puddle beneath her, presses and swings, and comes back to the ground. She reaches up, unclips the carabiner from the black webbing, walks back over to the trunk, places the black webbing back inside the trunk, and closes the lid, latches it. She stands up and walks away. Cut to black. Joanna Highgood, Zacco Studio, San Francisco, California. The camera looks up at the face of an African-American woman with close-cropped hair, bathed in a reddish-golden light. She looks out a window at a reddish-golden sky, hazy, dark. The camera zooms out to capturing a San Francisco skyline, a tree in the distance. Joanna walks toward a bank of industrial windows looking out from inside the warehouse space, rectangular panes of windows framed in metal sills. She reaches out toward the distance, looking out the windows. It reaches up and grabs a bar. There's a lattice, it becomes apparent there's a lattice work of metal bars that have been sculpted in the shape of the rectangular windowsills. Joanna pulls herself up onto the windowsill and lunges to the right. She stands almost as though holding a bow. The camera shifts and she steps up onto the windowsill and presses herself up one level, and then reaches out and steps onto the vertical bar going up and balances. And then the camera shifts to a shot of her balancing in the opposite direction. Now she steps up, walks across, and gracefully, slowly progresses up, then quickly leans into a lunge, looking again out the windows into the distance, and then climbing up to the very top of the windows as though to get a better view. And now in the top corner of the window, she crouches almost in a fetal position, her knees in toward her chest, her arms holding the bars above her head. She reaches one foot down, finding one of the horizontal bars beneath her, and shifts her weight down onto her foot. Gently, slowly, her other leg releases, comes back down, and she steps into another crouching position, a bit lower. The camera cuts to Joanna balanced, head down, feet floating in the sky, suspended just by her hands holding the bars on either side of her, and the light is an intense gold silhouette behind her. She bends one knee and then steps with the other foot all the way down to the base of the windows. Again, silhouetted in the window in the golden light, crouching at the bottom of the window, she places her hand on the sill and hops off and reaches out into the distance. Fade to black. Alice Shepherd. The Neighbor's Tree, Palo Alto, California, USA. A light-skinned, multiracial black woman in a wheeled body is suspended from a large oak tree, a rope attached near the center of her body. Her blonde, striped, copper and brown hair hangs down. She reaches up towards the rope that suspends her, begins to reach out with one arm to the side, counterbalancing against her silver wheels. She reaches out and down, her head hanging, and twists one arm reaching behind her back, the other arm spiraling around to the other side. She reaches up, brings her head to vertical. She reaches down and takes the frame of her wheelchair in her hands and then brings her hands up to run her fingers through her hair. She reaches up and bends over, reaches her arms out to the sides, twists around, her wheels twisting with her. She reaches up and takes the rope in her hands. She articulates her pelvis and swishes her wheels back and forth like the tail of a large fish. She reaches down to one side and her head drops again below, reaching down toward the earth. She curls up and counterbalances her head against wheels, head reaching up, now wheels reaching up, head going down, now head and arms reaching up, and now wheels coming up toward the rope. Now head going up, she reaches around the rope and grasps it, cradling it toward her chest. She reaches through with one shoulder blade and takes the rope in her hands behind her head. She spins and spirals. She reaches one arm across again, comes up, reaches the other arm around in a spiral above her head, takes the rope behind her head in a hand, lets her head drop down toward the ground, her arms reaching down. She takes the rope again and spirals around it, wheels spiraling toward the floor as the frame fades to black. Joe Kreider. Project Artaud, San Francisco, California, USA. A woman in a dark green dress and black boots stands in an industrial doorway. A greenish industrial door and red bricks surround her. She presses the door, slides it open, and then leans against the red brick buttress. She walks along, looking at a window, rectangular panes framed in green metal frames. She steps up onto the concrete windowsill and reclines along it. Reaching up, she pinches the metal frames that surround the panes, delicately balancing herself as she balances on the windowsill. A young woman in a mask walks by and waves at the camera. Like a mountain climber, Jo pinches the frames of the windows, negotiating her weight on the windowsill as she stands up, steadies herself, reaches out to feel the texture of the red brick at the side of the window. She steps back begins to walk backwards along the concrete base of the window. She steps behind, delicately crossing her feet, her legs, maintaining her balance delicately with her fingers on the very fine metal frames of the windows. She looks down, leaning against the brick on the other side of the window. She looks as though she might be looking inside the windows, and now she begins to lower herself, bending one knee, lowering her other leg toward the floor. She slides down along the brick, looking down as though off a high cliff, and jumps down to the sidewalk, and then bounces off a series of windows to exit and black out. Jody Lomask, Oakland Museum of California. A petite Caucasian woman rushes and presses against a concrete wall. A metal gate projects perpendicularly out from the wall. Her hands press against the rough, textured concrete, painted white. She presses again. She presses her back against the wall. Quick cuts from the camera to the grill at her side, the gate at her side. Purple shoes pressing hard against the concrete floor, struggling against the wall, futilely trying to get some leverage. She climbs up the white metal bars of the fence, reaches the top. It's sharpened and angled toward her, preventing her from getting over the top. She drops back to the concrete. The camera focuses on her shadow for a moment. Now the camera cuts back to her shadow. She whips her arms energetically, almost violently, swinging them, and again presses against the pocked white surface of the concrete wall. She rolls across her shoulders, across the front of her chest, again shot to the silhouette of her shadow on the floor, mottled with the leaves in the background. She swings her arms, almost angrily, cut to black. Pamela Donahue, White Mountains, northeastern USA. A black woman with curly black hair looks out a broken window from a old abandoned house. Cords hang down from a structure and her fingers wrap through them, and she begins to climb these white cords hanging in the yard of the abandoned house. Hand over hand, she climbs up, and then she grabs a bundle and divides it in half. There are 8 or 10 cords hanging in this bundle, and she takes 4 of each, separates them, and then pulls them around to wrap around her foot and hang through them. She swings her other foot up and through and balances out into a split, pulls her head through the cords and looks around. She leans back, frees her foot on the one side and then her other foot on the other side. She flips over and hangs upside down, unwrapping the cords from around her. She reaches up to split the white ropes wrapping around her waist. Now they dangle. She wraps them, the bundles of rope, around her torso until they've covered her, and then around the back of her neck. Sensuously, she manipulates them, holding them in her hands. She spins slowly, her hair hanging down. She begins to unwrap the ropes from around her waist, around her body. The camera pans up. We see that she's hanging just from the cords wrapped around her ankles. Now in slow motion, she releases one by one the ropes from her hands until she's hanging just by her feet. She extends her arms out to the side, the ropes rippling down beneath her in slow motion, the sun shining through them. As she releases, they dangle and fade to black. Beth Clark. San Francisco backyard, California. A white woman with a muscular build and shoulder-length brown hair and high cheekbones stands in front of a red, glossy spiral staircase in the backyard or garden. She runs up the staircase and then leans across the banister and slides back down. The camera changes point of view and she looks into the lens. Again, at the bottom of the staircase, she walks more solemnly, holding her hands to either side. She walks a step at a time, more slowly. She undulates, holding one of the rungs of the banister and the top. She looks up into the camera. The camera changes point of view back down. She slides slowly down the central pole of the spiral staircase. And now again, from another point of view, she runs up the staircase. She circles, holding both hands on the banister, and reaches through the bars of the banister and looks down at us in red shoes. Now she steps more gingerly down each step, leaning back against the banister, her arm carefully, gracefully dragging behind her, and it pulls out of the frame. Now she looks down through the bars of the banister, looking in toward the center of the staircase, feeling out wide with her hands. And again, a cut and a blackout. Dion Fox. Seattle, Washington. Brown feet hang above the floor in purple lycra tights. A black man with a thick circus rope wrapped around his neck, but he holds it closed around his neck as he hangs. He wraps his foot through the rope and releases himself. He extends his legs out into a split to the side, swings down and round and up, swings the rope around his pelvis, and hangs, head down. He flips the rope around, rearranges his feet. Now he pops his legs into a tuck, swings back around, wraps the rope again around his leg and hangs and drops, catches himself in the rope and rolls to the side gently in a controlled way, wrapping the rope, now unwrapping it and hanging just by one arm wrapped around his waist. He swings and swings back through, grabbing the rope with his leg, reaches up, hooks his knee over the rope and climbs up into a tuck, extends his legs down, hangs from just one arm. He grabs the rope and places it around his waist. Again, he flips up into a split, hooks the rope under his knee, comes up into a tuck, extends out, hanging from just one arm. Cut to another shot of him from below, wrapping the rope around his feet, his 2 feet, wrapped in the rope and suspending his weight from 1 foot. Now he rolls around, the rope spiraling around his leg, and pulls himself out into a split. He reaches up with one arm, the rope still knotted around his foot. He swings his legs through and around and up, straddles the rope again, reaches down, scoops the rope with his foot up, around to wrap around his waist. He holds it behind his head, reaches oddly behind one leg to take the rope again. Now hangs the rope behind his back and grasps just in one hand, and now with an incredible strength move wraps the rope behind him, hangs, comes back to feet touching the floor, and the frame fades to black. Wanda Moretti. Forte di Sant'Andrea, Venezia, Italia. Light plays shimmering on moving water. The camera zooms out. The image is enclosed by stone walls. The portal exposing the water, and now from far away, a drone captures 2 dancers suspended from the side of a wall. They swing from harnesses at their waists, ropes up to the edge of the building. From above, we see there are 2 dancers on each of 2 sides of the building, hanging from ropes. A man stands on top of the building playing a soprano sax. The dancers hang, twist, turn. Now they begin to run back and forth along the ancient stone wall, penduluming back and forth from ropes that are secured above them. And now 2 female dancers jump away from the wall, floating weightlessly. They swing in and out, almost as though gravity had turned on its side. Now they perform unison choreographies, gesturing with their arms, the 2 on the left and the 2 on the right together. From below, the 2 female dancers stepping lightly side to side, now falling and recovering themselves. Lightly, weightlessly jumping high off the wall and returning and swinging up and out and landing and up and down and scooting side to side and blackout. Joanna Diaz. Fish Island Circus, London, England. Brown hands reach down, stroking brown legs. They flex. A brown-skinned woman with her hair pulled up in a bun looks into the camera. Brown legs in brown leggings and a brown tank top enter the screen. We look from below. A white steel hoop suspended from the ceiling. The camera beneath it. She She pulls herself up into the hoop, hangs from her legs, and spins. Now the camera changes angles. She reaches up and hooks her knees over the top of the hoop, straddling the sides of the rope that suspends it. She arches her back, brings her foot down to touch the back of her hand over her head. And now she releases back down and reaches out to the sides, twisting her spine as the hoop spins. In the background, there are a variety of doors at various angles on a white wall in the studio. She balances on one arm. She reaches up and reaches around. She arches her belly, curving along the bottom of the hoop. She reaches up and takes the top in her hands. And now she reaches her other leg through. And again, she extends her legs out and then rolls over the top of the hoop, grabs the hoop between her legs, and extends her arms down, hanging just by gripping the hoop with her thighs. Now she goes below the hoop and swings back up to hook her knee over. She hangs from one elbow as she spins and one ankle. She reaches her other foot out and stretches herself into a split. She swings her knee back up, both legs hooked over the bottom of the hoop. She reaches up with one hand, hooks her elbow over the bottom of the hoop, and grabs her own knee and hangs just by her elbow. She reaches up and then drops to one hand, spinning below. She steps onto the ground. She swings her leg up to the side and steps out below. Now she articulates her shoulders and wraps her arms around to hug herself, arches her spine back and looks up. And now she quickly, again, articulates her shoulders, gesturing her hand across her face, out in front of her face. She swings her arms out and the frame fades to black. Amelia Rudolph. Donner Peak, Sierra Nevada, California, USA. Honor. Mountains and green trees as a camera zooms out from a high perspective, perhaps shot by a drone. A woman leans against a tree on top of a giant granite dome. We zoom in slightly, see her leaning, extending a leg out to the side, reaching an arm out, her curly brown hair across her face. The camera pans down to the tall green pine trees below. Lament. On a windy, rocky slope, she is on one knee and one arm, the wind blowing her curly brown hair and her purple outfit in the breeze. She looks out into the distance. Her arms wave in the wind, whipping. Now one reaches out directly towards the horizon, the other arm pulls it down. And again, one arm directing out toward the horizon, the other arm pulling it down in toward her knees. She walks, undulating her arms to the sides. She kicks out to one side, reaching down to the rock. From another angle, a slow motion view of her arms arcing through the air, snaking, swirling, the wind blowing in her hair. The video reverses itself. She's swinging in slow motion, picking up one leg, looking out at the horizon. Restore. She reaches out and lunges forward onto one leg, presses down onto her hands, Somehow, gravity is interrupted. She's able to maintain her balance at an impossible angle. She reaches out with one arm, with one foot, and now it seems that she lunges forward again. Perhaps the camera is tricking us. She reaches again, wraps her arms around herself, and fades to black. Records 2020, a film by Joanna Highgood and Mary Ellen Strom. Detailed credits roll. For more information on biographies and information on each of the pieces, please consult the website where you've accessed this video. This is Jess Curtis of Gravity Access Services, signing off. Thank you.